Hey, it's Moser with A Tale of Two Creeks. There they are. Aren't they lovely? So, you might recognize one or both of these creeks. Here's what I'm going to tell you. They're both in Ohio. One is, 10 to 15 minute drive from Beaver Local High School. The other is about a maybe 45-minute drive from Beaver Local High School. And I will say that I have spent many happy afternoons in both of these creeks because creeks are my happy place. I like creeks. And these are two beautiful examples, and they're close to home. They're local. Awesome. So, do you think you know which one of these creeks is which? Do you think you know one of these creeks? It's possible. But now it's time to share with you the alternative title to our little drama here. The Case of the Missing Amphibians! Dun dun dun! Oh, look at that! Oh, I love it. That's a smile. That's so sweet. And it's covered in snot. This is my friend. My friend, Cryptobranchus allegensis, also known as the Eastern Hellbender. It is a giant salamander. So it's a giant salamander, and it happens to be one of only 3 giant salamander species on the entire planet. One is here, the eastern salamander. There's one that's found in a tiny little pocket in Missouri in the Ozarks called the Ozark giant salamander, the Ozark Hellbender. And there's one that's found, I can't remember if it's China or Japan, but there's an Asian giant salamander, and those are even bigger than ours. They're really enormous. So anyway, it turns out there is a real hotspot for Hellbender diversity not far from here. That's pretty exciting. Yeah, it is. Ooh, I love Hellbenders. And here's another picture of a Hellbender. Now, some people say that Hellbenders are ugly. Some people say this is a face that only a mother could love. I think they're rather cute. And they're rock colored, that's kind of cool. And did I mention the part about them being covered in snot? Not everybody finds that cool, but I do. So now we have to ask the age-old question, the one that has been weighing on humanity for eons. What do Hellbenders want? And the answer, of course, is big rocks! I have fun doing that. So big rocks, like the ones here in the bottom of this creek. You might even recognize this creek. These big rocks are hiding places for Hellbenders. They are home and protection for Hellbenders. This is the part where I have to do my little public service announcement, my little PSA, and beg you not to flip rocks in the creek. And as a kid, because like I said, I spent many happy hours in a whole bunch of creeks. I picked up rocks and I, moved them around and I did all kinds of stuff. When you pick up rocks and stack them or move them or remove them from the creek, you're actually basically removing houses from the creek. So it's like something 400 times bigger than you came to your neighborhood and started tearing houses out of the ground and stacking them on top of one another because they look cool. There's a lot of life clinging to those rocks. And if you move them around a whole lot, then you end up dislodging a lot of the things that live there, and you may kill them. And, you'll see, but Hellbenders have got some problems. So if we can avoid harming them, we would really like to do that. So please don't move rocks, and please don't flip the big rocks. Because, again, Hellbenders need those big rocks because they need hiding spaces. They need places to hang out. Do you see the Hellbender in this picture? I didn't. I saw a circular rock that had a straight up pass through, and I didn't see it when I posted the picture, and I didn't see it when I showed the picture the first time to a class, and then about halfway through the second one I went, because that's actually a Hellbender's face sticking out from under that rock, and I didn't realize it. Wow, did I feel dumb. But yeah, once you see it, you can't unsee it. They need those rocky places to hide. They need that creek bottom with sand and little rocks and bigger rocks. That's a good environment for them. So hellbenders want big rocks. And what else do hellbenders want? Well, a place to hide their eggs. And that's where those rocks help out. Hellbenders are amphibians. You knew that. And amphibians, all amphibians, start life in the water. So frogs, toads, salamanders all start life in the water. Hellbenders happen to be one of the few amphibian species that stay in the water for their whole lives. But when they mate, when they reproduce, when they do it, they lay those fertilized eggs into little crevices in rocks in the bottom of the stream where they'll hopefully grow up protected, and at least a few of them will survive. So those hiding places are important. They're important for, hiding under and putting your eggs under and all kinds of stuff. What else do hellbenders want? What else do hellbenders want? Bubbles! Hellbenders want bubbles. This is one of the pictures that inspired somebody in one class to say, oh my gosh, they're like the pit bulls of the amphibian world. Most people think they're ugly and they look kind of scary, but they're really sweet. Yeah, and covered in snot, but that's a whole different thing. Hellbenders want bubbles. Because what do bubbles mean? Bubbles mean oxygen. And hellbenders need high levels of oxygen in their water. That's really important for them. They can't survive in water that doesn't have a lot of oxygen. If you have a fish tank, or you've ever seen a fish tank at home, you know that you've got a little air filter that's running bubbles, and those bubbles are putting oxygen in the water. So for hellbenders and other species that need highly oxygenated water, those fast-moving streams that tumble over the rocks, that have lots of little waterfalls, those streams tumbling over rocks, that provides well-oxygenated water. That's a good thing. Getting the oxygen in the water is one thing. Keeping it in the water is another thing. So, if you've ever had a 2-liter bottle of pop, you know that cold pop will hold more bubbles than warm pop. If you leave the pop on the counter overnight open, it's going to go flat. If you leave it in the fridge, it'll continue to hold some of those bubbles. The same is true for streams. A stream that's got really hot water in it, that's too warm, will not be able to hold the oxygen in the water. In order to hold high levels of oxygenation, streams need to be cool. And what keeps streams cool? Trees shading the stream. If you've ever kayaked or tubed on a creek, you know that a creek that's got a nice woody surroundings is far preferable to something that's out in the full sun where you can't get any shade, because warm water tends to be water that doesn't have as much oxygen in it. So we know that hellbenders want big rocks and they want bubbles. Well, what else do they want? What else do they need? What else motivates them? They are vicious predators. They need prey. These guys are serious predators. If it'll fit in their mouth, they'll eat it. Crayfish, you think they're going to pinch your face? Who cares? Hellbender doesn't care. Water snake, that is not a poisonous snake. That's just a plain old northern water snake. Yeah, hellbender will eat that. Fish, sure. Other kinds of bugs? Absolutely. You got it? Hellbenders will eat it. A baby hellbender? Yeah, I'd eat that. They are walking machines for eating meat. They're carnivorous and they are hunters. No vegetarians among the hellbender ranks, I'll tell you that. Now let's talk a little bit about where hellbenders are found. The scientific way of saying where something is found is, of course, its range. And this map with all these nice green blobs shows the range for 2 species of giant salamander. This is the eastern giant salamander, and this is the Ozark giant salamander. They are different species, and when we get a little further down the road and talk about what makes a species, we'll find out why they're considered different species. But I want to focus on the eastern hellbender for a moment. That's the one that we have here because, as a matter of fact, in Columbiana County, there is a location that is a hotspot for hellbender diversity. How cool is that? And you can see we're right on the edge of their range, You know, if you go over into central Pennsylvania, you'll find more hellbenders there. Remember those cool oxygenated streams like you find in the mountains. Those are great hellbender habitat. Now, this is the range of the hellbender, and I'm going to guess that this map is from maybe the late 1970s. This other map that I have tells a slightly different story, and a sadder one, honestly. So what this map shows is the gray area is the original range of the hellbender. The yellow blobs on that map are areas where there are still numerous healthy populations. So notice that we no longer qualify under those criteria. They've had it rough. They've had it rough. Now, this doesn't mean that there are no hellbenders outside of those yellow blobs, but in terms of where there are really large populations and healthy populations, that area has gotten pretty small. Okay, enough about my friends the hellbenders. Are you ready to figure out where our two creeks are? Okay, I'll tell you. Aha, our two creeks. We've got Mill Creek, which runs through Mill Creek Park in Boardman and Youngstown. And, did you recognize this one? It's close to home for some of you. We have the North Fork of Little Beaver Creek. And that picture, as some of you probably figured out, is looking upstream at Fredericktown, from where the North Fork joins into the Middle Fork, and that's looking upstream at the Red Bridge that goes across the creek. So, what do we know about our two creeks? Well, I mean, they're pretty similar in these pictures. You know, they've got nice woods around them. They're not too far apart. Okay. The water in each of them is eventually going to end up in the Ohio River, either directly or indirectly. Good, good. They have some bridges, yes. You can kayak on either of them, yes. Okay, well, let's start off with Little Beaver Creek. So, again, that top picture is the tubs at Fredericktown. That's actually on the main body of the creek, not quite on the North Fork. And this picture on the bottom, I believe, is the main fork shot from the state park. It's hard to find specific pictures of the North Fork. If you've got some and you want to share them with me with geographic information as to where they were taken, I'd appreciate it. But, you know, the North Fork of Little Beaver Creek is a beautiful creek, and it's a hotbed for hellbenders. This is the North Fork on a map. We've got Fredericktown down here at the very bottom, where the North Fork empties into the Middle Fork of the creek. And then this map just shows it up past, oh, that looks like maybe Carmel Anchor Road, or no. Anyway, you know, it doesn't show it all the way north where it turns at Negley. But if we zoom out a little bit, we get this picture. So this is the North Fork, and it starts actually in Pennsylvania over near Enon Valley. It goes east for a little while, gets pretty close to the Pennsylvania Turnpike, heads south, winds around through Darlington. It goes under Route 51. If you've ever been over to Harry's Place on 51 near Chippewa for fish, it crosses right near there. And then it sort of meanders along to the west, goes past those state game lands out on Darlington or Channelton Road out of Negley. It comes into Negley. It passes underneath, it's 154 there, and then it starts to head south, and it heads south all the way to Fredericktown. So, beautiful little creek, local for us, great place to kayak or what have you. Well, let's look at our other creek. So this is Mill Creek. And Mill Creek is, once you get north of Western Reserve Road, so a little north of Columbiana, Mill Creek is almost entirely in lands owned by Mill Creek Metro Parks. And Mill Creek Metro Parks is fantastic. I went to college in Youngstown and spent a lot of time in the park because I was a biologist, and a lot of our field classes went to Mill Creek Park because it was accessible. It was close to campus. And I spent many, many happy hours in the creek or on trails looking for bugs or plants or mammals or whatever else. You can see here we've got a walking trail next to the creek, and in this other picture we've got a little waterfall on the creek. And, we've got plenty of that. That means oxygenated water. That's good. So that's Mill Creek. If we look at Mill Creek on a map, Mill Creek runs from the south to the north, and it dumps into the Mahoning River right near downtown Youngstown. This is 224. If you've been to Boardman, there's 224 and 7 where the mall is. And if we zoom out a little bit, we can see that Mill Creek actually starts near Columbiana, Ohio, just south of Columbiana, not too far from like Crestview Elementary and High School. It flows north through Beaver Township. It crosses under the turnpike and then continues to head north. And from about here on, it's entirely in lands owned by the park. So that's kind of a nice thing. This is one of the most famous sites in Mill Creek Park. This is Lanternmans Mill, and I think every single human being who's ever taken a picture in Mill Creek Park, except for me, has taken a picture of Lanternmans Mill. It's well known. If you go to the Canfield Fair and you go to the Fine Arts Building and you look at the pictures, the photos, you're going to find 15 or 20 photos of Lanternmans Mill, which it's fine. It's pretty. And, there's an observation deck. But look at that waterfall. That's gorgeous. There's a nice deep pool under there. Well, you know what waterfalls mean. They mean bubbles. And what do bubbles mean? Oxygen. Oxygen! So, that pool would be well oxygenated. And look, it's got nice trees overhanging it the whole way back. That's a shady, cool, high oxygen stream. Good stuff. Now, in the 1960s, in another era, a guy I know named Bill Whitehouse was the park naturalist for Mill Creek Park. And the naturalist is like, the nature person. They do the snake shows and they take visitors on hikes and point out plants and, all that stuff. They do all the nature programming. If you've ever gone to a state park or a local park and gone to like a class of any sort, there was probably somebody there who was the naturalist, or, now sometimes they get called environmental educators. So anyway, Bill Whitehouse was the naturalist there for about 30 years. And in the 1960s, Bill's office was actually in Lanternmans Mill. Now, it was down a little bit lower, I think, but that's okay. You'll have to let me get away with some license. And Bill used to talk about the fact, because I was lucky enough to know Bill. He was a fantastic naturalist. He was absolutely brilliant. You could walk out in the woods or the creek or any place else with him and point at something and he could tell you what it was and tell you a story about it. Great guy. And Bill always said, oh man, in the 1960s, it was fantastic. I'd look out my window and I'd look down at the pool under the falls and those Hellbenders would be having a wild sex party. What? Did you say wild sex party? I did. They were doing it. The Hellbenders loved the pool under the falls as a breeding area. And Hellbenders get their name because when they reproduce, they twist and they bend and they get all wrapped up in one another as they exchange eggs and sperm, or as biologists would say, exchange genetic material. So anyway, there was a sex party going on in the pool under the falls. So, Bill did what any good naturalist would do. He got out his binoculars and he sat at his window and he watched it. I couldn't pass up a chance like that, could you? So anyway, this raging wild salamander hookup thing is going on in the falls. They're just making more salamanders. It's a wonderful thing. Good. That's good. But here's the next part of the story. I was actually a watershed coordinator in the Mill Creek watershed from 2001 to 2008. So I was responsible for doing some environmental education, for helping people plan to maintain or improve water quality, for doing some public education and outreach. And I got to work on Mill Creek a lot, and I got to work with the EPA, and I got to work with local officials and local landowners. And when I was a watershed coordinator from 2001 to 2008, there was not a single Hellbender anywhere in Mill Creek. period. Not one. They were gone. So that gives us our secondary title, The Case of the Missing Amphibians. Because in the North Fork of Little Beaver Creek, they're thriving. They're doing well. They're happy, they're healthy, they're reproducing, they're making baby salamanders. But in Mill Creek, they're not anymore. And they were. They were. Just 60 years ago. What could have possibly happened? You might have some ideas. You might have some hunches. This is our lead into our ecology matrices. And tomorrow, we will talk a little bit more about the two creeks in question and see if we can come up with any ideas about where the salamanders have gone, what has happened to them. After you watch this video, there will be a short recall quiz, sort of the big ideas that you should have picked up from the video, from the conversation. And then there will be another one tomorrow with another recall quiz to follow. Questions? Okay.